Hello everyone and welcome back to the Skype sessions. And today I'm talking with the editor of a book which will be coming out very soon after this video is released, Dr. Leonard Delorenzo. Leonard, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. Well, could you please introduce yourself to the viewers?
Sure. Well, hello everyone. I am Leonard Delorenzo. I work and teach at the University of Notre Dame. I'm part of an institute called the McGrath Institute for Church Life. We do research and outreach and programming between the academy and the church. And then I teach in our Department of Theology at Notre Dame, specialize in systematic theology and teach the undergraduate, graduate level and whatnot.
And we'll talk about your book shortly, but this isn't the first book that you've been involved in. So what are some of the other things that you've been a part of?
Well, in terms of writing, I've been publishing books since about 2015, 2016. An academic book on the theology of the communion of saints called Work of Love with University of Notre Dame Press. A number of books that are kind of in between the academic and pastoral space, 6 or 7 of those. One, say, on the path to forming people in the Christian faith, that's called Turn to the Lord with Liturgical Press, or a smaller book on the questions that Jesus asked in the gospel, that's called The God Who Questions, or a book on praying into and through the person of Christ, that's called Into the Heart of the Father with Word Among Us Press. And I have another book coming out this year called Our Faithful Departed, Where They Are and Why It Matters, about our relationship with the beloved dead, and that's with Ave Maria Press. So those are some of the books I've been working on for the last few years, and seems like there's always more to address at all the times.
Now, on that last book, Prayer for the Dead is something that people are often quite surprised that Lewis endorsed. He has this lovely phrase in a letter where he says, I'm going to pray to God what I care about, and how could you stop me? How could you stop me praying for those who are passed? But that's a transition into an important question, since this is Pints with Jack. What has been your relationship with C.S. Lewis?
You know, I came to C.S. Lewis really in my young adult life. I didn't read or wasn't read Lewis when I was a child, really. So even the first time I read the Chronicles of Narnia, I think I was already in graduate school. You know, I was in my early 20s, and it just so happened that there was a course that was offered on the themes of deification in the writings of C.S. Lewis, and I took that course and it really captured my imagination, both the theological work, but also the sort of literary exposition, and really learning to enjoy C.S. Lewis, especially in some of the literature, which I think is probably the best of what he does for us, is give us something to enjoy that also nourishes. So that was the beginning of my relationship with Lewis, and then over the past couple of decades, continuing to reading to my own children. We've hosted some academic lecture series or conferences that relate to or on C.S. Lewis and some of his work, which is actually where this volume came from, was from a lecture series that we hosted on this very topic.
Well, let's talk about the Chronicles of Transformation. So it arose out of this series. What was the series specifically focused on? Was it theosis and deification, or more broadly than that?
You know, we had developed a number of different lecture series that happened to coincide with the liturgical seasons of Lent into Easter. So we had done one series several years ago on Dante, reading Dante and the Divine Comedy from Lent through Easter. We did one on the book of Exodus. The whole thing, yes. 2 cantos a day for 50 days. But then lectures to go with that. And then we did one on the book of Exodus, shorter than the Divine Comedy, but a theological treatment and sort of liturgical movement through the book of Exodus. And the reading of the Chronicles of Narnia, we had placed in liturgical time as well. And so there was communal sort of reading of the Chronicles of Narnia. And then we punctuated that with a number of different lectures over the course of several weeks on each of the Chronicles, and each of the lecturers took on different themes that they had chosen as they treated each of the Chronicles that in some way had to do with this theme of journeying, growth, and transformation. And so it was from that lecture series that the idea of the volume came forth, to really bring the fruits of what was going on in this very communal and lively setting of exploring these themes together, and to make it more widely available to readers through this volume.
And so were they all local faculty, or did you have visiting speakers as part of this?
It was a mix of local faculty here from Notre Dame, and then some folks that don't reside here. We, for example, brought in Michael Ward, who many people would know who follow C.S. Lewis, and he was a lecturer in the series and that contributed one of the chapters to this volume. He wrote on Prince Caspian, or Peter Schockel, who's written very extensively on Lewis and the Chronicles of Narnia. He joined us and did the lecture and then wrote the chapter on the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Rebecca Lamb, who's University of St. Andrew in Scotland, she came in and treated the silver chair and the themes of education and Lewis's theory of education that's really sort of breathed through the silver chair almost as a literary companion to the abolition of man. So those were our outside speakers and contributors, and then we had folks from here in our theology department, people that do literature and the arts, also contributed to this work with us.
Oh, those are some great names. We've had most of them on the show, or they are at very least scheduled to be on the show next season. So would you mind just fleshing out a little bit? You mentioned a few of the topics that were there, such as Rebecca Lamb's one on education, and some of the books which were covered. But thematically, what were some of the things that some of these people, as well as some of your local faculty, what did they talk about? So
I can start with the beginning, and
it's a very good place to start.
Indeed. With The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, I actually wrote on that one to enter into the world of children, which is the place of working out what is most important in our world here. That actually one of the themes of that book is you shouldn't close the door of a wardrobe, as Lewis tells us over and over again. But the whole point, it seems, was that these children who learn what they learn there actually apply it in the world that we live in here. And especially what it requires to root out, say, the stain of betrayal and the redemption of human relations and human communities. So some of that in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Prince Caspian, as I mentioned, this was taken by Michael Ward and talked about the hard virtue of Prince Caspian, this formation in character to become persons of virtue, and the martial theme of that book, both in terms of war, but also in terms of growing in virtue, and the sort of woodsy theme of Prince Caspian. When we would get, say, to the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, it's Lewis really, as Peter Schockel wrote, trying to really develop his craft of writing myth and the way in which myth really develops through the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, but also his humor kind of moves up another level. His social satire moves up another level. So there's something new that's beginning in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. The theme of education, as I mentioned, in Silver Chair, an optative education, as Rebecca Lamb takes us through. Or in The Horse and His Boy, which Francesca Murphy, one of my colleagues here, presents as probably the most autobiographical of the Chronicles in terms of Lewis writing in some ways himself through this. Not that it's strictly autobiographical, but this desire for the due north and the way in which the desire and the imagination is pulled into this land of freedom. And then with the Magician's Nephew, the liturgical movement of this act of creation, which can be mapped on quite well to what happens, for example, in the Easter Vigil and the enlivening of all of creation through that. My colleague Catherine Cavadini wrote really beautifully on that. And then The Last Battle, Anthony Pagliariti, who's a biblical scholar here at Notre Dame, really traced the way in which language is diminished and perverted through the sort of evil in the last battle and the redemption of language and meaning through the apocalyptic tones of the last battle. Going along with each of those chronicles, then, we were really fortunate to have an artist create an original sketch for each one of the chronicles, which are really this beautiful work and really profound work that he put forth. His name is Stephen Baraney. And then we had a poet who wrote an original poem cycle for the entirety of the chronicles, 7 distinct poems, one for each of the chronicles. Madeline Lewis Infantine was our poet who did that. So the volume itself, though it is about art and the theological imagination, it also presents art and theology and literary analysis and character development, all within this theme of transformation.
This sounds really wonderful, and I know it is absolutely going to be up the street of my co-host Matt, who is also a Notre Dame alumnum. So I think I'm definitely going to get this for his Christmas present. But when will I be able to buy this, and where will I be able to get it from?
As far as I know, it should be due out really any time. I've been told as early as June 2022, and we're running out of days here. So I believe somewhere in the middle of July 2022, it'll drop. It's available from Ignatius Press. Really worked beautifully with them to bring this to bear. And then, of course, you can get it everywhere else online, Amazon and whatnot. But
Wonderful. Well, I'll put links to everything that I can find in the show notes, and we'll be posting on our social media and what have you when it is actually released. What are you going to be working on next? Because you seem to be firing out books at a prodigious rate. So what's next on the agenda for you?
so beginning next week, and this is really next week because I'm teaching a intensive summer course right now. But when I complete that, I'm working on this small but sort of very practical book on for parents to help their children prepare to receive Eucharist, First Communion in particular. That's a sort of theological and biblical guide so that parents and children and their children can do this together. It's a sort of companion to a different book I wrote on forming communities to prepare people for, say, the sacrament of confirmation or moving into more Christian maturity and Christian adulthood. And that book was called Turn to the Lord, Forming Disciples for Lifelong Discipleship or Lifelong Conversion. And so I'll be doing that book next, this one on First Communion, and then I'm going to take a little vacation after that in August. It's been a long stretch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I like the sound of that book because my son, he was baptized in the Byzantine church. So he's received all of his initiation already. So that's great. But on the other hand, it puts more pressure on me to make sure I form him properly because he's not going to have quite the same CCD classes that he would have had otherwise.
Sure.
Well, this has been wonderful having you on the show. Where can people go to find out more about you specifically?
Sure. Well, I have a website, leonardjdelorenzo.com. I've also started in the last year to put out a weekly newsletter called Life, Sweetness, Hope. Had really great interaction with folks through that. Short things, one on life, one on sweetness, one on hope, each week with some additional things that people might be interested in watching or reading. And so I'm always welcoming subscribers to that, and they can find that through my website or bit.ly/lifesweetnesshope, bit.ly Life, Sweetness, Hope.
Wonderful. Well, I will put some links to that in the show note. Dr. Leonard, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, what a pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity.
You're very welcome. And viewers, please join us again next time when we'll continue going further up and further in. Cheers.